So my name is Tina Hascher, and I will present you a joint project together with Caroline Mansfield and Susan Beltman here in the nice red dress. Our research was driven by the idea that specifically in the COVID-19 pandemic, teacher well-being could be under pressure. And this is why we have been interested into the question how teachers navigate through these different times. So I will introduce you to a collaborative project, and we did the parallel project in Switzerland and in Western Australia. And this is why we are presenting together, even if it's only me today, because Western Australia is totally different time frames. So, but Caroline and Sue helped me with presenting and preparing the presentation. So this is the agenda. I shortly will introduce the idea of teacher well-being to you. Then we'll introduce the research question and how did we proceed with our study. A quick look at some results, and then I will open up the presentation to discussion, of course, related to the limitation of our research. So if it comes to teacher well-being, if you have already maybe made yourself familiar with the topic, you easily get lost because there are so many different definitions of teacher well-being, and the research is increasingly, and it's really amazing how important this topic is now for educational research. And you see teacher well-being as a positive emotional state, for example. It's defined as an individual sense of professional fulfillment. It's defined as a subjective evaluation. So there's a lot there, a lot of different approaches to teacher well-being. However, an overview shows, and this is that's where we are taking our perspective, that there's agreement, at least as the differentiation between hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, that well-being is a multidimensional construct with, I always call it a positive imbalance, where the positive aspects of these multi-dimensions, like physical complaints, for example, are not as strong as the positive aspects. So you get something like a positive imbalance. And that teacher well-being is very important as a precondition for the successful fulfillment of the professional role. And this is why we've got so interested into the topic, because we said that it's in this challenging time during the pandemic, it's specifically important to know how teachers felt and to ask if there are any maybe problems or specific resources that teachers can draw on to balance and to restore their well-being during the pandemic. So what we decided is to look at teacher well-being because, and there is quite a nice evidence in terms of the positive effects or at least correlations with teacher well-being. You see here a quick overview over the positive correlations related, for example, to teaching effectiveness, to teacher absenteeism, to teachers' optimal functioning and commitment to school, and even to student achievement. And during the last weeks or months or years, let's say, teacher well-being is also discussed related to successful educational governance. So it's not only on an individual base, but it's growing, it's important, it's growing up to, let's say, the whole educational system. So when the teachers had to face the pandemic, we thought about that it was a totally new situation for most of the teachers. So teachers haven't been prepared for that topic. And this is why we came up with an idea and discussed if this situation could be a little bit similar, not comparable, but similar to early career teacher well-being, because there's a very interesting publication by Johnson and al. About teacher well-being, as early career teacher well-being. And they outlined that when teachers are in unfamiliar situations, such as the pandemic, the education did not equip teachers with sufficient knowledge, skills, and disposition. There might be a serious mismatch between the motives, the motivations, and the daily realities. There is a lack of programs that help them to cope with the situation. And maybe they do, like early career teachers, a sink or swim or trial and error strategy. And there might be unfavorable personal and contextual conditions, as well as poor school structures and insufficient support from principals that make this situation of the pandemic so problematic. So these aspects that Johnson and al. Mentioned for early career teachers might be adapted to teachers in the pandemic. I will come back to that at the end of my presentation. So we wanted to know, as we knew that teacher well-being can be threatened by critical situations such as the pandemic, how did teachers feel during school closures? And how did this distance learning or distance teaching impact on their well-being? So before I explain how we tried to answer this question, a short outline that you know how the situation was in Switzerland, because there are a lot of nice information now how different the situation was in different countries. And to be honest, the situation in Switzerland was not so bad because, as you can see, the schools were closed for, let's say, only 6 weeks in 2020. So Switzerland aimed at very soon going back to more or less regular teaching as soon as possible. But how this school closure was announced and introduced was very difficult because teachers and schools and students and parents heard on Friday that schools will be closed, and schools were closed on Monday. But on the other hand, schools had quite a lot of autonomy how they practiced the school closure. So there had been individual solution due to teachers and students' home situation. For example, there had been schools where teachers were allowed to work in school, in the school building. There have been schools where some students still came to school because they didn't have any support at home. There have been schools where single teachers met with single individual students at school. So the range of the practice of school closure was very different, but the majority followed this strict school closure. Accordingly, the practices of distance teaching varied, related to IT support, collegial support, or principal support, as well as teacher-student and teacher-parent interaction. And there are nice overview articles now regarding how these practices have been different during this time of school closure. So coming back to my research question, or our research question, how did teachers feel during school closure? And how did distance teaching influence teacher well-being? We decided to follow a qualitative approach and conducted semi-structured individual Zoom interviews that lasted about 30 minutes between April and October. So at the start of or during the school closure and a little bit later, we asked about causes of low and high teacher well-being. And we had about 21 teachers in Switzerland and the same group number of teachers in Australia. All interviews were, of course, transcribed and then analyzed with Max QDR. And we tried to focus the analysis on a category system we developed in another study where we try to identify predictors of well-being. And this study is, I hope, soon will be published, so then you can read about that as well. So I quickly will introduce you into our category system, that you understand how we try to get a system and to understand the causes of teacher well-being during the pandemic. So first we divide it into objective factors and subjective factors. This is one line of analysis and differentiation. And among these objective and subjective factors, we differentiated between more general aspects that are related to the individual, for example, the living conditions or the age, younger or older teachers. Then there have been individual work-related aspects, such as the employment status or the individual years of teaching experience. And then there have been, and these are more or less objective measurements, because you say, oh, I'm teaching now for 25 years, for example, or for 2 years. And there have been contextual work-related objective aspects, such as the classroom composition or the resources of the school. So these are aspects the teachers mentioned, but they're not related to their personal evaluation or interpretation, but more on an objective way of indicating aspects of teaching and characteristics of teaching. On the other hand, there have been subjective factors, and these subjective factors are analyzed accordingly. So you have individual general subjective factors, such as subjective health, subjective disposition, or personality aspects. You have individual work-related subjective factors, such as, for example, self-efficacy beliefs. We all know that quite well. And you have more contextual work-related. So these are aspects that are not only in the responsibility or located internal in the teacher, but it's more related to interactions such as collegial cooperation or student relationship. So this was our structure, how we analyzed the answers. And as you see, we got 615 statements to analyze and to understand. And as you see from this slide, there is quite a high overload of subjective factors. So that means, asked about the situation during the pandemic, the teachers predominantly related to subjective factors. We also asked the teachers at the start of our interview how they rate their well-being, teacher well-being, their professional well-being, more generally during this situation. And what we found is that on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 very low, 10 very high, you see all teachers have indicated a scale value over 6, so it's quite a high well-being. And 10 teachers even said it's 8 plus. So quite high well-being, let's say, that the teacher reported. But ask how they felt during the school closure. They said this came relatively unexpectedly for us, and we literally had to stump up a whole program out of nowhere in a very short time, that is in a weekend. I had to call all the parents to ask if they needed care, so if the children needed care, and I had to see if the children, yes, how they are reachable, and I also informed them that the school is closed, and there have been a lot of discussion. That was already a burden, that was hard chunk until it started. So you see, you maybe already are reminded to the idea or these aspects of Johnson et al. With early career teachers. We relatively unexpected, a high pressure, high interaction with everyone, less support. So this school closure, this moment of school closure was quite traumatic for a lot of teachers. So this moment was really hard for them. Interestingly, when it comes to the question, how did you manage this difficult time during the pandemic? We find that, of course, there are factors that impeded teacher well-being. And here you see objective factors. And for example, there were aspects such as the political heterogeneity I always marked and highlighted the most frequent answers. And for example, a teacher said every school or canton, so these are the states in Switzerland, does something different, and every teacher does a little bit as it does for them. I find this very difficult, and also very difficult for the parents who then have different children in different classes, because not only different schools differs, but even within a school, there have been different approaches to solve distance teaching or to solve the problems with the pandemic. But on the other hand, there have been as well positive factors, and that means factors that supported the teacher well-being during the pandemic. For example, there have been class composition that had been positive, or school resources that teachers mentioned that helped them to cope with this difficult situation. So one teacher, for example, said, I teach a 6th grade. I know the students well, I know the parents well. And the selections for transitions, because we have a 6+ system into secondary school, were already done. So I was able to go into the school closure time quite relaxed. So you see, this is more objective. It's not the relationship with a student that eases the teacher's life, but the structure that the selection in the 6th grade have been already done. So related to the factors, the subjective factors that impeded well-being, we found that specifically individual work-related aspects have been mentioned. So professional challenges, psychological stress, a lack of self-efficacy, or high workload. And for example, one teacher answered, there are always children who do nothing or work little for the class or at home, but I have them with me and can react somehow if I'm in school. However, I couldn't react during the school closure. I couldn't do anything. So these are, this is psychological stress as well as a professional challenge for the teacher, that she loses her contact with the students. And it's related to the fact that she has students with special needs, that need specific support. So this is why she mentioned it, and we coded it as individual work-related. Another example was the uncertainty of the situation. And this was not the pandemic situation, but really related to work, as this teacher, for example, mentioned. This uncertainty was a burden for me because this class will transit to another school in summer, and I was totally unsure how to reach the learning goals for the students. I found that difficult. But as you can see, maybe already saw from the numbers, there have been a lot of positive aspects related to the subjective factors. So aspects that supported teacher well-being, and that was the majority of the aspects mentioned. As well, the differentiation within individual general, individual work-related, and contextual work-related. And there you see that aspects like resilience, capacity, new teaching experiences, and specifically contextual work-related aspects, such as the relationships between teachers and students and teachers and parents, came into play. So 3 last quotes from the teachers to illustrate these positive and empowering factors. One teacher said, I knew the situation was new to everyone, no matter what position you are in school, and I knew it would be good, no matter how. There are solutions. I had few concerns or fear or whatever. So this is an internal resource of the teacher, that she trusted in a good outcome and good solutions. Related to individual work, one teacher, for example, stated, and then I started to create learning videos in every subject. And I really got into flow. I was really always at school from 8 in the morning to 5 in the evening, and just film and cut things together. In the beginning, of course, it took forever until I was more experienced, but it was so much fun. So you see, this new teaching experience was really empowering for that teacher. And this way of approaching students opened like we could say, a new method for the teacher. Contextual work-related, one final example. The relationship with the families, with the children themselves, and also with the parents have become much more intense. And then I really got the kids. They wrote me sometimes, good night. So you see, the relationship was built up, and this teacher took a lot of energy and power from this relationship that was different to a regular relationship in class, but it was positive. To conclude, excuse me, the school closure and the transfer to distance teaching definitely had a negative impact on teacher well-being. But we see that teachers were able, at least Swiss primary teachers were able, to restore and support their well-being by a variety of factors, such as social relatedness, subjective resources, and new teaching experiences. Although our study is, of course, limited due to sample selection, sample size, because we did the snowball system, had only 21 teachers. The period of data collection was quite long. And of course, there are remembering effects and memory bias. We think it's quite interesting to align these results with Johnson et al. Results for early career teacher well-being. So these teachers report that teacher education did not equip teachers for such a situation. So the demands of distance teaching were totally new. There was a mismatch, specifically at the beginning, of teachers' motivation and the practice and the realities of distance teaching. They just had to try. They had to sink or swim and try and error in terms of distance teaching. And there have been unfavorable personal and contextual conditions, subjective and objective, for distance teaching. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to receive some questions to our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tina, for this very insightful and empirically rich presentation. And the floor belongs to participants now. Please either open your microphone or post a question to the chat. We have 5 minutes to raise questions and have a discussion. So would somebody like to turn on the microphone, or perhaps we have some questions in the chat?
I can say something.
Joanna, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So Tina and your colleague, I found your study very interesting and very important study about teacher well-being. Of course, we can discuss the concept of teacher well-being, as you said, because in this study, from one side, we were looking at the conditions that influence on teacher work. On the other side, you were talking about the, how we can say, it might be, you know, also the concept of teacher emotional labor.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we can discuss whatever. I found this very interesting because from this 615 statement, you said that it is a small scale study. I think it's a very large study to look at this statement and to analyze this. We noticed that teachers mainly they look from the subjective point of view.
Exactly.
What happens with their teacher with their well-being. They see also these external influences, and you know, the more they would be aware, it is my assumption, the more they would be aware about the external influences, it would be easier for them to adjust to these circumstances. Because sometimes teachers, you know, we found, especially a year ago, a lot of heroic attitudes towards teaching. And teachers, they try to, you know, to do everything on themselves, they felt very huge responsibility. And as I said, my assumption is if they would see more themselves in the world, even they would have higher well-being, because this responsibility means, on the other hand, that they feel responsible for the whole world, and it have impact on sometimes minimizing the energy, because it's also the issue when we have the issue about the well-being, there is another extreme, teacher burnout. So I found this really interesting. Thank you very much, and congratulations for this study.
Yeah.
So I have no questions, sorry, just only a reflection.
Yeah. Thanks, Joanna. Very, very inspiring, because aspects such as the opportunity to experience such a adverse situation and to manage it could be a specific boost to teacher well-being. So they faced a situation that they never have been before, and then they react in a way, and all teachers, or most of the teachers, have been in a way effective, even if they just gave some work to the students, some worksheets, and collected the worksheets and discussed with them over the fence. So I think related to the concept of teacher well-being, this could be in terms of professional experiences, not only a negative experience, but as well a positive, because they see that they can manage teaching even in such challenging times as a pandemic. And on the other hand, what you mentioned with the emotional labor, I think that's very interesting, because I don't know how you've faced that, but I faced this as well as a university teacher. Sometimes I'm really so unhappy with this distance teaching. And I always try to, I'm not always very successful, but I try to manage my negative emotions so that students don't realize that I don't like all these lectures with only black screens so much. I try to do my best, and that is emotional work, emotional labor that Hoxha mentioned that we have to do. That, well, let's start our lecture today or our teaching course today. Even if we are apart from each other, we know we can do that. And in my deep inner sense, I feel, oh, I hate this teaching, and I hope there will be a relief soon. So I think this is a very interesting aspect as well, and that could be, I don't think that we could follow this or could analyze this with our data, because we ask more general question, but this would be very interesting to do as well. Thank you for this inspiring feedback.
Okay, great. Is there any other question? Open, Tina?
I don't see any other question in the chat. So if there's no one at the moment. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. And we can move to the next presenter. And we have Adriatik Hoxha and her team, and the impact of COVID-19 on education and learning in Western Balkans. So, Mr. Hoxha, hello.
Thank you. I'd just like to greet everybody first of all. It's a pleasure to participate in this conference. We have prepared this study together with some of my colleagues, Suada Ajdarpasic, Gezim Jusufi, and Gazmend Qorraj. Can you hear me? I'm just going to try, because I've been using most of the time Google Meet. So I'll try to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes. Maybe you can put it in the presenter mode. Yeah. Yeah, great.
Okay. So COVID has generated a negative impact, not only in terms of health, but also in terms of security, economic welfare, and education worldwide. In terms of education, we in Kosovo, we had some time during which the schools were closed. Also at the university, we spent like 1 month or more until we started teaching again. In addition to this, the pandemic has created a negative asymmetric shock on the educational system of different EU countries as well as Western Balkans. Compared to other sectors, the education system has moved relatively swiftly from a physical to an online schooling environment. Therefore, if we compare education to other sectors, like production or services, banking sector, it has enjoyed faster adaptation to the new circumstances, as well as better continuity. Many things that were thought impossible, like even myself, I have been always opponent of having this online teaching because I was always thinking it may not be as productive. However, when I started even teaching myself online, I teach macroeconomics, applied macroeconomics and economics of EU integration. I have seen that if there is a proper implementation of IT tools, if you have the right platform, then continuity and quality may not be as big obstacle. As Western Balkan countries aim for the EU integration, the main challenges to the education system are, can this newly adopted system of education ensure implementation of the Lisbon agenda? Respectively, can it provide interlinkage between education, research, and economy? Second challenge is, can this newly adopted education system in the EU target cultural values, network, and the partnership between EU universities and worldwide? The third challenge is whether this newly adopted system can provide the capacity building and transfer of knowledge at the universities. The final challenge is whether this system can allow for the assessment of knowledge or competencies achieved during this teaching process without compromising the academic integrity. So what can we say for the Western Balkans? In general, it is the least developed part of Europe. There is no doubt about it. Economy is less developed compared to other regions, to other parts of Europe. And in a similar way, also the education system has low quality. It is not only due to limited financial resources, but I think also the cultural background plays a lot of role in the low quality of education system. As a result, these countries are facing double challenges. There is also low participation in higher education, accompanied by low quality of the education, of higher education in these countries. Although there are individual cases where you get excellent researchers or you get good faculties or universities in some fields, the general picture is that quality is much lower than in the rest of European Union. Why that happens? There is lack of research infrastructure and equipment, not in all areas, but in some areas, especially in let's say natural sciences, there might not be they might not have high quality labs as they have in European Union. Then non-adequate teaching environments. Also big challenges with IT coverage and electronic devices. not all the schools are connected with internet. Not all the schools or classrooms at the university buildings have IT equipment or a wireless or useful wireless network. Also, one of the biggest obstacles is a large gap on computer. Oh, sorry, I apologize because I haven't been putting the right slides. Also, there is a large gap in terms of computer literacy. Like I teach myself macroeconomics. In the first year, I have also some other older colleagues teaching the same module. And when I discuss with students, there is a big gap on whether the professor is using only the PowerPoint slides, or in addition to this, he's complementing his teaching with use of various statistical software such as Suada, SPSS, or using various data from Eurostat and using the latest data so as to create better understanding for the students. Some of the professors do not even possess the proper computer skills, which generates a lot of problems during the teaching. Theoretical issues. According to the OECD study, the educational institutions in the Western Balkans are characterized by low level of digital equipment and skills. So there is a lot of there are a lot of things which can be done to improve this area. Also, these countries have faced significant challenges during the pandemic, because if there is no digital equipment, if there are no skills on how to utilize that digital equipment to conduct the teaching, that is for sure going to cause a lot of issues in delivering teaching. Further studies have reported that Western Balkan countries, on average, are less ready for digital functioning in comparison to their regional peers in Southeastern Europe, such as Bulgaria, Croatia, Romania, and Slovenia. In this study, we have employed several surveys in order to analyze the challenges that are faced by adopted educational system during this COVID-19 pandemics. Additionally, the data will be compared in order to analyze the differences between these countries regarding digitalization process in these countries and opportunities coming from this process towards the improvement of distance teaching and learning. The study presented by Marinoni et al. Specifies that there has been a negative impact on the higher education institution research projects and international programs, considering that 83% of institutions had canceled international travel. So like we're holding now this conference online, I think if there were different circumstances, we maybe have met somewhere in Slovenia or elsewhere. Also, 81% of them have either postponed or canceled scientific conferences. We also had conference at the University of Pristina, which was about to start in March of 2020. However, it was canceled by the COVID events. Furthermore, with regard to the analysis of additional challenges, the research conducted by Unger and Meira has revealed that most of the students were concerned about lack of social interaction, face-to-face student-professor meeting, and generally they had a feeling that the online education system will diminish their academic development. Well, in my case, with the best students, this has not been the problem, because during my class or classes which are similar, we apply a lot of statistical analysis using statistical software, Excel, SPSS, and other. And in some areas, it has been more advantageous. Why? Because students have their computers in front of them, and they can simultaneously follow the instructor when they deliver the classes, apply various data, various tools to analyze the data. Whereas if they were in the class, it would have been more difficult to follow, considering that not only in Kosovo but also in other Western Balkan countries, they have very large number of students in the class. So following small letters of start and projector, it would have been rather difficult. Among the concerns regarding distance learning was, according to a study conducted in Spain by Gonzalez et al., finds that a significant positive income of COVID confinement on student performance. In some cases, it has really been better, because if students were locked inside their houses, they may have spent more time studying. A study directed by Benito on 3 different universities found that 82% of faculty members were satisfied or very satisfied with the recent online teaching experience, even though most of them think that students are not yet prepared for this quick shift to online teaching. Preliminary studies for the Western Balkans, the development of new technologies and widespread internet access has made the online systems easier for students and universities. Also, Chaushi et al., in a study conducted in the Western Balkans, concluded that 72% of universities had some system in place regarding e-learning. The online system of education includes online provided learning materials, lecture notes, assignments, etc. According to the study of Renosi et al., only 40.1% of professors in Western Balkans had previous experience with the online teaching method. More than 50% of professors face difficulty related to the noise because of the environment during the online teaching. The study performed by Qorraj et al. At the public universities in Kosovo about educational challenges and COVID finds that regarding the period needed by the universities to adopt the new online teaching system, 70% of respondents have said that it took only 1 week, and 30% responded that their university needed 2 weeks to adopt to the online teaching system. Additionally, 75% of respondents assume that the online teaching system will increase the flexibility to adopt the new upcoming challenges, whereas 25% think that the online system will increase the IT skills of both academic staff and students. When asked what affects the students' attendance, around 40% of respondents think that the non-adequate teaching environment is a challenge. 35% face challenge with IT coverage, and 25% lack of electronic devices. And also there are no programs directed at providing students with better IT coverage or electronic devices. With respect to socio-emotional dimension, 55% of the interviewees do not expect that the online education system will have negative impact. Sorry about that. And 45% expect the online system of education to impact the social, emotional dimension negatively. Another question was regarding the Lisbon agenda linkage with education, research, and economy. 83% think that online system will ensure the Lisbon agenda, and 16.7% do not think so. Furthermore, 55% of respondents believe that online teaching will target cultural values, networks, and partnerships between universities. 30% expect a relative impact, and 15% do not think that the new system will have an impact. Conclusions. Undoubtedly, COVID-19 has had enormous impact, not only in terms of health, but also in terms of security, economics, as well as education worldwide. In general, the countries of Western Balkans should greatly enhance digitalization capabilities in order to better cope with new realities of online teaching. In addition to this, they should also invest significantly more in the digitalization of the higher education institutions. Develop not only capacities, physical capacities with hardware, but also in terms of software platforms, so as to better serve the education needs. Finally, the country should develop their capacity in the future, as well as utilize experiences of the developed countries, as well as utilize the assistance, financial assistance from EU in a productive way. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Adriatik. So now we have time. We have almost 10 minutes for discussion. So are there any questions from the audience? Please turn on your microphone or post them in the chat. Tina, yes, please.
Thank you very much for this interesting insight into the situation. It's always really inspiring to see how other countries or regions cope with the situation. I'm very curious about professional support that is given to any form of teacher in your countries. So are there or have there been any, let's say, professional learning courses? Have there been support of principals or deans or rectors? Or was it just left to the people in the way it's just do as you try to do and do your best, but maybe that's not good enough? Or had there been as well like a bottom-up professional activity or let's say power of getting information and getting more professional skills and receiving support in professional development?
Thank you. At the university, we have been provided with various materials on how to conduct teaching, on how to record classes. For those who are IT capable, it has not been a major obstacle. The biggest problem has been with some of the older staff. And considering, as I've said earlier, Kosovo, Macedonia, Serbia are less developed compared to the EU. No matter how much you invest in some people, ultimately it's not possible for them to conduct any online teaching. If they don't know statistical software in real life, how they're going to use it through online teaching. So I think that has been the situation in all the countries. Also, if one goes in YouTube, he's going to get a lot of information, or you go in Google, you get all kinds of information on how to use Zoom or Google Meet or various teaching platforms or various softwares. So although that material has been provided, I think there has been lack of absorption capacity, because there is structurally, there is very high deficit of IT skills in this region. Although nominally you might get people who have conducted all these trainings, in reality, they may have participated in those trainings, but they have not developed the skills properly. And that is a serious issue. Ultimately, the diploma the students get in United Kingdom, Germany, or other Slovenia or other European countries cannot be compared to diploma one gets in Western Balkan countries. People do not get the same skills and competencies.
Would you agree that as teachers or university teachers taught before the corona situation is predictive how they teach or taught after or within or during the pandemic? So if you are well equipped and you're quite open, you transfer this into the new situation. But if you're not, because, you know, I wonder, due to this, the IT support, when I could imagine that, for example, principal or rector could say, well, we know these guys are maybe a little bit more vulnerable and they will have problems with the move from face-to-face to online teaching. So they need specific support, and this support could be given maybe by another university because they are doing the same course, and microeconomics basics are taught everywhere in the world. So I think a lot of all this change was left to the individual, a little bit as in schools, and every individual tried to cope as good or as bad as he could. So do you think that like more planned action on improving teaching in such a situation and beyond could be helpful?
Yeah, that was true. The professors which were poor before with physical teaching, they were also poor with online teaching. Another issue with some individuals is, even if you try to help them, they get also insulted in some way psychologically, because if they ask for help, they think in their minds that they do not know stuff, and it's difficult, let's say, for a full professor to go and ask teaching assistants, how do I do this or how do I do that? They get sense of inferiority, and also there is some kind of psychological barrier with people that they do not ask help. You get those materials, if you do not understand, you just go and ask somebody, or you go in Google. But I don't know, it's just like mental barrier, which some people cannot just go over it. I'm quite literate with, let's say, software, but if I don't know something, I just have no problem in asking somebody. Even my son, I don't know this, can you tell me? I don't have any mental barriers. But it's problem which I think also training, like we get psychological training for professors, just advise them. I think that would be also very important. If they ask for help, there is nothing wrong with it. Yeah. So I think also psychological training may be very productive. They shouldn't be feeling inferior if they ask for help. Everybody needs help at some period of time in life.
But I think that is also, it's just not an individual attitude, but as well a cultural issue of the work context. So if a university or a school does not agree on that we are learners throughout the whole life, then it's difficult to admit that I'm a learner and that I need support. But if you have implemented, I think, a kind of learning culture, a learning community into an organization, could be much more easier to exchange and to improve.
It is. That's the most difficult part. I mean, you can get an individual who becomes successful, but to change society, it is very difficult. And there are a lot of negative social rules all over Balkans. I mean, there is lack of economic exchange, a lot of political issues. And instead of people focusing on education, social issues, adoption of new technologies, improvement of education systems, because this is what I say to students. I compare to them, I can actually even now show it to you, maybe that may be relevant. Can you still see my screen or no?
No.
I'll just go, let me just open this. Do I have time, 2-3 minutes?
Yeah, we have 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. So. I'm going to be very quick. Let me just one moment. Yeah. Okay. So here I have data about United States, Japan, and Norway, and Ghana. I don't know whether you can see this or no. So if you compare GDP per capita in Ghana and United States, they were very close in 1820. In 2000, there is a big difference. And where that difference originates from, you just go and check average years of schooling in Ghana, Bangladesh, and if you compare it with Norway, United States, and Japan. So the best way to develop economies, this is what I also say to my students, is develop education. You develop education, you're going to develop everything. But unfortunately, it's not about individual or group, how to say, consciousness. It should be a country or regional consciousness. I think all the Western Balkan countries, they should just get rid of all the historic wars and conflicts. They should just rather focus on jointly developing their education. Thank you.
If I may ask a final question before we move to the next presentation, because you talk about this divide between European Union countries and the Western Balkans, and you also refer to the Lisbon agenda priorities, which means you consider them as important. So to what extent do you think that, for example, the integration of Western Balkans to the European Union would help to improve also the situation in education, like you described?
Basically, the Western Balkan countries, first of all, they have problems with rule of law, with functional democracy. Yeah. Not to talk about economy. I think that they should just shift priorities toward not only electing people democratically, but also to improve the rule of law, to develop institutions adequately, not just formally, but just set the priorities from political to economic development and educational priorities. I think education should be foundation of every development of any country. I think the data which I presented earlier shows best. Just make comparison between Ghana's output in one side and Norway, United States, and Japan. It shows very well.
Okay, thank you very much. We can proceed now with the third and final presentation for this session. We have Joanna Madalinska, who will talk to us about teacher education policy and practice challenges in times of COVID pandemic in Poland. So Joanna, the floor is yours.
Invitation, and I'm so happy that we are together this morning, and we have had such a very interesting morning presentation. I will focus on the situation which is in Poland regarding distance education, but as I said, because I use my mobile, I will try to stop the video just to focus on the presentation, just in case. And I hope that we will see this. Yeah, I hope that you see this. So my presentation is about the project in which I was, its global dimension, and on the basis of the project, then we focus on this title of the presentation, Teacher Education Policy and Practice Challenges in Times of the COVID-19 in Poland. And as Tina said, and we know from different literatures, the COVID-19 pandemic is such a critical time in our lives, also for the researchers. And we know that this time created the challenges for education that are very specific, and also the implication that are very significant for the way in which we think about the education, about the practice of teaching and learning. Yesterday, during the keynote, we have it was very interesting keynote lecture and the discussion as well. And we together we notice the importance of teachers that let me say, even 10 years ago, it was obvious in the media that usually we complain on the teachers. And the time of pandemia show us how important is the teacher work. Therefore, I think that any research on teachers nowadays, on the life situation, on the attitudes toward teaching is very important. And the International Teacher Task Force last year, it was around June, estimates that around 63 million primary and secondary teachers around the world were affected by school closure in 165 countries due to pandemic. Of course, in different countries, the situation looked differently. Because, as Tina said, sometimes it was like 6 weeks closure of the school. Sometimes children, they still don't go to the school. So it depends on, it is different situation. In Poland, for example, we have, how to tell you, we have the time when we close the school and time when the schools are reopened. And since 1 week, really 1 week ago, our Ministry of Education, even though it is very close to the end of the school year, because it is around mid of June, he decided that we will reopen the schools because it's better for children. And it was interesting reaction from the parents, from children as well, because they were against this solution, because a lot of disruption is connected with this. So to some extent, we can say that even though we see the importance of the direct teaching, parents and children, they would prefer to stay at, of course, only up to the end of this school year in the situation in which they have, I mean, the remote teaching. And what we noticed, because it is 1 year of our different practice, different pattern of our lives, we noticed that teachers, they have to adapt to the situation. Some of them, they simply transform, they simply change their way of teaching. Maybe I will say differently. They simply use the ICT technologies for teaching in the same way like it was in face-to-face teaching. And some of the teachers, they really adapt and even transform their way of teaching, which is quite interesting. However, we notice in our different research report that teachers, by definition, they were not prepared for remote teaching. For some of them, it was the experience was very difficult, even sometimes impossible. And also in the center of our considerations are students, because they were marginalized. In Poland, we still don't have the proper statistics that will show us what was the percentage of students who were beyond the system of education, who even exclude themselves from the system. Sometimes students, they have good access to internet, they have the facilities, but they don't like to continue the education. And if the families don't pay enough attention to these students, they don't attend the virtual way to the schools, which is the new situation in Poland. And as I mentioned during our discussion on Tina's papers, initial reports on pandemic time show us, and teachers' work show us that teachers, they were described as heroic, and they behave in a very exceptional way, we can say. And however, we should notice that pandemia has also this effect on psychology of teachers and their professional situation as well. And on the basis of my study, I can say that in Poland, teachers for sure, they didn't receive adequate social emotional support, and also it was the issue of the school principals, because teachers usually they complain that they didn't receive the enough support from the school's principals. On the other hand, we can pose the question, what about the school principals, because also they were not completely prepared for this new situation. And when we look at the at different studies, it was done even 20 years ago, or even more years ago, by Christopher Day and his colleagues. Christopher Day usually pointed out the importance of teachers' voices in the research on education. However, the previous year show us how much important is to listen to the teachers, to learn from their experiences. If we would like to think about the teacher education policy, if we would like to think how to support the everyday teachers' life and their work. And in our study, about which I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, first of all, we decided to be as close as possible to the teachers, and the study was initiated by international organization ISET and MESH Guides. MESH Guides, it's the organization that mobilize knowledge on teachers, on teaching, on schools. And as you see, the title of the project was Teacher Experience and Practices in the Time of COVID-19. And what is interesting, the project, we can say that it has had its global dimension because we did, the project was conducted parallelly at 30 different contexts across the globe. And already it was prepared the report from this project, and the book on which I work regarding TEPE network, the book on the teachers' quality and teacher education quality. In this book, we have we will include the chapter connected with this project in regard of the teacher quality, and the chapter is written by Karol Gentles, the president of ISET and the initiator of this project. I think it's quite interesting chapter. And in our project, we have, as you see, 5 different questions. And this question focus on teachers' job, how this job changed since pandemic, on the strategies that teachers they found useful, on practices that they would like to continue using beyond the pandemic time. And we look also on the things how teachers, what teachers do differently, would like to do differently in the future, and the challenges, what kind of the challenges they recognize. And I think this the answer for the question 5 might be interesting for our discussion. And it was also interesting that in the project we involved not only teachers, but also teachers educators. In Poland, we have had, like in other countries, the focus groups. And in these focus groups, it was, as I mentioned, for me, it was very significant because we created the platform for the meeting of teachers and teachers educators, and they were also able to listen to each other and to exchange their experiences. So we found this project very interesting, not only from the research point of view, but also from the practical point of view, because our research participants, they said that it was a good a kind of learning for them, because they have the time for the reflection on their own practice, and they were able to learn from each other. And regarding the answer for the first question, how have teachers, educators, because now I would like to focus mainly on teacher educators, how have teachers educators job changed since the pandemic? I think this the answer for this question might be interesting for us, because I assume that we are mainly teacher educators, so it means that we work with the prospective teachers at our universities. And not only we offer the different courses for teachers who work at the schools. So we noticed that for teacher educators, even was more difficult than for teachers to switch to distance learning. You can imagine that among academic teachers, we have a lot of professors who have their own routines, and for them it was really a shock to adapt to new situation and to offer the lecture with the use of the computer. And really they complain a lot on this, because they felt this lack of the condition to create the real relationship with the students. So the switch to distance learning was like a kind of the critical moment for them in their career. They have to learn how to use the new applications, and mainly in our study we have had the academic teachers from the University of Warsaw. And personally, I can say that at the University of Warsaw in Poland, our academic teachers, they have very good conditions for developing, for the professional development now, because they have a lot of different courses. They can learn how to use these new applications, but still there is the lack of the study that we can say how our teachers, educators, they feel regarding the conditions at different universities. I can say that at the University of Warsaw, they have quite good situation, so they were able to learn to use new applications. However, the one conditions that can hinder, we can say, or minimize the potential is their own personal perception, because sometimes in our study we notice the expressions that in fact in the heart in their own soul they don't want to use how to learn these new applications, because they perceive the time of the pandemic like the break. It means that they hope that beyond the pandemic they will come back to the normal conditions. So it was quite interesting, because it was about this finding was about how to survive the pandemic. So the teachers who teach prospective teachers, they and in common they said that it is very time consuming for them to prepare the study materials for students, for the prospective teachers. They notice that they have to spend more time that is devoted to meeting students online and motivating students. In Poland, at the beginning, we have the situation that it was up to academic teachers at each university. They have the choice if they would like to teach synchronically or asynchronically. So those academics who don't feel comfortable with remote teaching, they avoid this remote teaching, but lots of them, they try to use to work according to the plan, and they found this very, very difficult to motivate students. So it's another issue, and I think it's worth adding that this academic year we are obliged to work synchronically. And this finding is interesting because these teacher educators at the universities, they said that it was interesting. They said, we can save the time by not commuting to work. So it was a kind of the advantage. And they didn't like the situation that it was a lack of the community regarding the new conditions for the work, and they have the limited contacts with the colleagues and the students. So Tina, she mentioned about her personal experiences in this way as well. What practices teachers, educators found useful and which they want to continue using in the future, they said that running classes synchronously is very useful with through using different applications. So they found out that it is important. Conducting test and examination online. Soon I will show you that the challenges is conducting tests and examination online. However, they found this as a useful practice. Online consultation with students and online duties, like the meeting the board of the faculty with the in online form, providing students with recorded lectures, presentation, and other multimedia materials was also for the teachers quite useful, and online discussing using virtual forums. What strategies or practices teachers, educators want to continue using? They said that they would like to continue remote work that allow as much as direct contact with students as possible, conducting online classes through applications. So they said that some kind of classes might be we can say form in the hybrid form. It means or blended learning. We can say that a part of the classes they could conduct directly and also in a remote way, and they found this quite a kind of the strategy that is worth continuing in the future. Maintain direct contact with students and create a space for students to contact each other. It was the strategy that occurred very important for the academic teachers to continue and provide students with lecture recordings and presentations. In the past, they simply didn't use this, and they noticed that it's good for the students because they can repeat materials, they can spend more time for preparing for the exams in this way, and they will have better knowledge with using these lecture recordings and presentations. And what they would like to do differently in the future, teacher who work with the prospective teachers, they noticed that one of the crucial issue was teacher practicum, and it was very difficult for them to organize this. And for sure, if the situation will continue, I mean the remote teaching, for sure it must be the change of the form of conducting teacher practicum, because it shouldn't be only like now we have. It is mainly observation of online teaching at the schools. Change the form of conducting online exams. So on the one hand, as I said, it was a kind of the advantage of this new time that they can have these online exams. But on the other hand, they found that it's easy for students to cheating, and it's very demanding to have these online exams, because one issue is how to create a very good task for students that will force them to think and to use their knowledge, not only to repeat the information. Change the manner of checking attendance online. They found this let me say that it is a kind of the difficulties to check attendance online, because it's about different tasks that teachers they have to do at the same time. They would like to have the lectures attractives, workshops attractives, and on the other hand, they have to look at this, we can say, using the words on the bureaucracy to check the attendance online. Get better equipment for the remote work, enhance mutual support among the teachers, and enroll in courses to be able to use new technologies better, so they for sure in future will work on this. And the challenges. And they found that in times of crisis, in the future, it's really important to look on the way how we maintain student-teacher contact and support. It's also the issue about the internationalization, how we work with the students from abroad, because they found a lot of different issues regarding, for example, Erasmus students, how to help them not to feel isolated at the time when they suddenly were, we can say, in a trap to stay in Poland because they didn't have any opportunity to come back. We have some students, for example, from Spain in this situation, and on the other hand, they were not able to contact with their peers. Help students to maintain mutual relations, maintaining relations between students and teacher education, professional development of teacher educators. Teacher educators, usually we talk about the professional development of teachers, but the pandemic time show us how much important it is to work with the academic teachers as well, and building a sense of schools and university cooperation. And the challenges. If we will look at the description of our TEPE conference, we can find a lot of it was a very good introduction to our conference. And I found some similarities between the findings and this description. I could say that the pandemic, COVID-19 have raised a number of questions concerning the education of future teachers and thus education in general. The changes that are taking place in schools around the world pose major challenges to education policy and teacher education policy in particular, and these challenges require immediate response from educational and teacher education researchers. And we can find these challenges. First of all, we can look on the issue how to use the various ICT tools available today, but it is quite, we can say, instrumental technological issue. However, it is still a challenge for the teacher education policy and practice, but also I think it's really worth to look at these more general and systematic issues, like to what extent and how the competences required in teacher education program can be achieved through remote teaching and learning. Regarding the study that I presented, it was the issue about the teaching practicum, the possibilities for remote verification, assessment of knowledge, competences as achieved, and the equivalence, success and validity. It is a challenge because still we learn at university how to organize the online exams in the best way. How these changes in communities or even the lack of informal or direct contact between students and teachers affect the formation of academic communities. I think it's a very interesting challenge for teacher education policy and practice, because if we really would like to have good teacher education, we should create the conditions for the sense of belongings to universities, the sense of having the communities of practices at universities, and the study show us this challenge. So I think it's worth to consider this challenge, this issue. The implication and issues of the pandemic in the field of educational research in general and in research in teacher education in particular, because we notice that our focus on the different themes adjust to pandemic times. So it is also the issue how to organize a kind of the meta study on the studies that we conduct nowadays, and how teacher education institution could best contribute to meeting these new challenges at the different levels, European, national level, or the level of the school. So thank you for much, and let's just move to the question.
Okay, thank you, Joanna, very much. We have a few more questions, perhaps. Yeah, from Tina. I see the hand raised, please.
It was just a applause, but I indeed have a question. Thank you, Joanna, for your inspiring presentation. I specifically love the idea of talking more generally about blended learning in the future. We received a few days ago a mail from our vice rector, and he suggested, because we now start preparing the autumn term, so the next upcoming semester, and he suggests a kind of selective remote teaching. So that means blended within a course, but as well could mean blended across the educational program of teachers and educational research students. So I wonder if from your data, you can conclude any recommendations how this blended learning according to a program, not just to an individual course, but a whole program could look like, because I think that needs kind of a didactic, a coordinated plan for a new curriculum for teacher education and educational research students, to optimize and to capitalize on all these positive experiences, as well as the negative, of course, we have done during these online teaching during the pandemic.
Yeah, with the pleasure. I have 1 minute, okay? So I can maybe not recommendation, but the experiences of these academic teachers. There were teachers from different universities, and I found very interesting that, for example, academic teachers, the way in which they direct teaching for the first for the students who enroll the program, because they found that they should be embedded at the university, and for the other students they offer remote teaching. In this way they try to help the induction of this new students. And for example, at the University of Warsaw we didn't offer this, and I found this experience very interesting, and they were very happy about this. So it might be one of the recommendations if the pandemic will continue. And the experiences, especially those, and they work with these prospective teachers, I found that those who are supervisors, they said that for them it would be enough to have like 2-3 direct contact, and then to continue in a remote way. Because what they found also interesting, that students, because usually, for example, in Poland, it is a small group, like 5, 6, 7 students, they are more brave to present their findings with using, it was a kind of very interesting example. So they're more brave to be active during these courses, and they present their findings. They have more questions because they use their own computers, and they say, like my colleague said, "Professor, I would like to show you something. I will introduce you to my questionnaire in the media," and simply they open, the link, and they started to discuss. even 1 year ago, it's about the culture. Students, they simply attend the courses 1 week, and they have 1.5 hours in a traditional way. They, especially the master level, when they work with the supervisors, they usually they didn't use these new technologies in this way. So it speed up the process. So I think that it's significant to share these experiences of these teachers. So thank you, Tina, for the
Okay.
question.
Thank you very much, Joanna, also for replying to the questions. And I think we should conclude this session, so we have a break. It was a very interesting session, and thank you very much to all the presenters for their insightful speeches, and to the audience also for listening and taking part. So we have now a break of 15 minutes, and the next session starts 10:45 to 11. Okay,